News channel after news channel after news channel. Ever wonder why they report the same news? This is Wake Up America.
Brought to you by Citizen Stringer.
The media has become absolute lunacy. What makes us different? We just tell the truth. Daily headlines, politics, social issues, focusing on headlines that the mainstream media ignores. Conservative to the core and honest, sometimes to a fault. Unapologetically American. Welcome to Wake Up America with your host, Stephen Oatley.
You know that TikTok where the guy walks up to people, he's a really small guy, and he goes, "Pfft." That's kind of my feeling on life today. Yeah, I'm wearing the same shirt. I didn't even care. Like, that's just, I woke up in a fury to pack orders and stuff. And then I decided I'm tearing down Pure Truth Coffee, the website, and rebuilding it all together. Fuck Shopify. I hate them. And there's just all problems with shipping, problems with everything. So I'm rebuilding a whole new one on WordPress. So you guys will see that probably by the end of the day, because I'm pretty quick with the old WordPress coding stuff now. But I've been receiving phone calls and messages since yesterday on the 1776 stuff in the calls to the veterans line. And I want to say something. I respect certain people. I do not respect the decision or the defense of calling that number at all, nor will I ever. So the people that are sending me messages, the people that are lucky, privileged enough to have my cell phone number, that call me knowing that I'm going to answer for them because I respect them, you don't need to call me anymore about this stuff. Because ultimately, I'm never going to align, even though I believe that the people that are being held without any due process whatsoever. I'm never going to advocate for clogging up or attempting to clog up or even calling that line. And a lot of people are seemingly confused as to what that means. They're saying, well, Steve, you don't seem like you're in defense of due process for the people that are locked up in DC jails. And I'm like, how do you get that? Other than the whole fact that I spent so many hours, so many minutes of my shows talking about the fact that those people are being held without due process. But I also don't believe that they're all innocent. I just don't. I watched that shit with my own eyes. That day, I watched it. I don't know. So it's crazy. I guess Oreo may have talked about me this morning because several of you guys are talking about it in the chat, but Oreo needs to do it. I'll take something out of his playbook. He needs to do it to stay relevant. But today there's a markup, a full committee business meeting with a go figure, the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. Now this committee meeting is actually quite large. They're going to be talking about a ton of bills, including VA suicide bills and stuff like that, and funding and things like that. Different amendments that are going to be instituted. And I'm quite sure that this is going to come up. The stuff over the past 2 days is going to come up. So I do have that hearing up. I am going to watch it, and I'm going to try something with Citizen Stringer and see if I could use a cloud to play this video. I don't know if it's going to work, but I'm going to give it a shot after this, and then we'll all kind of just wait. Hurricane Fiona, that's, I think, still over Puerto Rico. Well, no, it passed Puerto Rico. Where is it? The Dominican Republic now. It's been upgraded to a Category 4 hurricane, and it's dumping a lot of water. I know that from my region in Maryland, a bunch of people a bunch of the rescue workers actually just landed this morning in Puerto Rico. I believe the entire island is still without power. So it's crazy. You know, it's just crazy stuff. Everything that's going on in this country, and the fact that so many people are just, I had one person send me a message that's like, why are they vilifying these people? A Military Times article from March of 2021, which was saying that they need to better watch veterans because there was a higher majority of veterans that were arrested for January 6th than there are veterans. Like, you know, for example, 5% of the U.S. population have veteran status, while 13% of everyone that was arrested for January 6th had veteran status. So, which has caused a lot of people to question why. Like, why was there that radicalization, right? Why were so many people willing to go and do that? I have no idea. But ultimately,
are the meeting platform hosts ready to begin?
But yes. Ultimately, I'm not going to believe that this was just some big, well, outside of the fact, I don't know why anyone was stupid enough to follow and go and attack the Capitol. I have no fucking clue. And I'm never going to be able to understand it. I don't know, you know, but whatever. Mexico has been having big earthquakes and no one is reporting it, except everyone is reporting it, Candy Nelson Vick. It's been all over the media. It's been all over the media about the big earthquakes. They had a couple of 7.0s. They had tsunami warnings. It's been widely reported. But the thing is, most domestic news stations, that is a news station that's focused here in the United States, they focus on things that directly relate to the U.S. economy, to U.S. culture, that kind of stuff. What's going on in Mexico doesn't, for a variety of reasons. You would say, well, Steve, yes, we have a border crisis and it's being flooded by migrants, except less than 80% or less than 20% of all the migrants that are crossing the southern border are from Mexico. In fact, less than 20%, or I believe less than 30% of all the migrants that have crossed this year are even from South America. The majority of them are from somewhere else. You know what I mean? So, you know, you may be saying, well, Steve, we spend a lot of time talking about Russia and Ukraine. Oh, what about the Queen? You know, the media's got countless hours on the Queen. I have no idea why we've been covering the Queen funeral as much as we have. I'm very curious. Has Newsmax or OAN been covering it nonstop like Fox News, CNN, and the rest of those shitty outlets have been doing? I don't know. I haven't been watching Newsmax or OAN. Or maybe they actually reported on actual news. Or their own partisan view on the world too, because that's the thing is news right now is contrived as this. It's just partisan all the time. That's all it is. It doesn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat, and I'm guilty of it too. I report things based on my interests and things that I'm interested in, but at the same time, I get very frustrated. Like I'm frustrated in all reality because I just wasted an hour on the phone, and then at the end I'm like, why are you calling me? Like, is this some plea to get me to agree with you? Because I'm not going to. You know, people understand my position on this. You don't call a veteran suicide hotline, and you certainly don't defend it. And that's exactly what this group of people. And I'm going to keep them separate from now, but I'm going to keep. You know, that's exactly what it seems that they're doing, because they feel like they're at wit's end. There's no other recourse. So. Someone said, isn't there a relevant hearing today you could air? Tracy Bush said, yes. And that's exactly what my plan was. If you watch this video from the beginning, that's the problem with being a preemptive ass. When you join, I'm on a roll today. I feel like slow punching a wall, you know, because like how I'm talking, like normally you would punch a wall to have like a, you know, whatever. I feel like doing it slowly today. Like that's just my general feeling, because I think it would be funny. Like if I slow motion, but and I still had the same amount of force, you know, you guys have no idea what I'm talking about. It's pretty crazy. Everything is crazy. Like I can talk about on one hand what everybody's talking about in the media, right? Think about it. Some are talking about the 1776 stuff. Ukraine is a big one because Ukraine, you know, mainstream media is saying that Ukraine has taken back the size of Connecticut. They've taken back an area the size of Connecticut, and it's really great. Joe Biden apparently on a 60-minute interview hinted that he may or may not run for president. So that's caused Fox News to lose their fucking minds, even though it doesn't matter. If the guy does run or doesn't run, I don't know who would have a better chance of defeating him, right? Actually, I think we'd have a better chance of defeating him if he says he will run, but whatever. They talk about that. They talk about this teacher with the big fake boobs, right? They talk about that. And of course, yesterday, I even heard it again with the madman in New York City that used the hatchet or axe, as they call it, because they're stupid and never actually cut a tree down. Good luck cutting a tree down with a hatchet. It's going to take you for fucking ever. An axe is going to take about a lot longer or a lot quicker, and it's going to take a lot more force. But they don't seem to know what an axe versus a hatchet is, because they're stupid. But everybody's talking about that, using that as an example of how New York City crime rate has gone through the roof, not getting the backstory of this. and the restraint that maniac showed by not killing all those kids, the kids that attacked him previously, who he didn't even strike with the axe. And in fact, he didn't even take off the cover to the hatchet. I know I just said axe, but whatever. You know what I mean? That's what mainstream media's reported on. Oh, and then the teacher, like even Crowder yesterday did a whole bit about that teacher, the construction trades worker that wore the big giant prosthetic busk, right? And I know mainstream media's talked about it. It's all over. Like I wish sometimes that there was a filter on Twitter that I could just filter certain images where I could still follow the people and still get notifications, but where I could filter images, because I don't want to see a dude with a giant busk, right? A prosthetic bust. It's not even real. The guy doesn't feel that way. I can only assume that he's doing it to draw to draw indifference to the craziness in our schools and what is acceptable. Like if he is in fact mentally challenged. If it was a one-time thing, I think then you would go with the first argument that he was doing it to draw attention to what was going on in the school districts. But is it not Wednesday the 21st? It is. I didn't change it because I was lazy. I changed the date, but I forgot to change the day, So everyone knows what day it is, so you don't really need to point out that it's Tuesday the 21st, because you all know it's Wednesday the 21st, and you all know that I was on a phone call with someone, which is why I was late getting this live stream out. If I could keep talking, I probably would, but I have the chat up and I keep getting cut off by my own want and whatever. You guys want to listen to Chip Roy for a second?
Issues of the day.
Talk about the VA.
We'll look at whatever the rules changes are, but I really do. I'm going to look at Mr. Rosendale's bill.
Bullshit.
But for the love of everything holy, can we just
focus
on
I
solving
hate
the problems for the American people?
science.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Roy, in that spirit, that is why I did not intend a long conversation. I provided
I'm
forms
so
for
annoyed
every member,
today. Can you
to
tell?
submit their written
Like I'm
comments.
just very
We
annoyed. I'm going to
sent
tell you
a
what I'm
memo
going to do.
outlining
I'm gonna fuck up
the
my
issues
whole
that we've
computer
incurred,
right
and
now.
I
I'm
didn't
gonna
think
take
it was
this,
warranted a huge discussion. But
right here,
the point,
which is that. Hopefully, watch what I'm going to do. This is fucking fantastic. You guys are going to love this one. I know you're going to be like, "Whoa, Steve, what are you doing? You're breaking the internet." Ah, fuck! I unplugged the wrong fucking cable. Fuck! I unplugged my. I unplugged the wrong cable. Oh my god. This is how my day is going today. Damn, I unplugged my speakers. So now I can't even hear the damn. Oh. I've been productive, which is good. Damn, where's that fucking cable? Okay, here it is. So that one goes back. That's kind of funny. I don't care who you are right there. That's funny. See, that's why sometimes... Oh, no, something else just came unplugged. That's this one. That's what I unplugged, wasn't it?
We still are one short on a
see,
quorum.
so now my sound is
Yeah,
back.
we are. But I think we can go ahead as long as we don't start taking up business and just overview of what the business is we're going to be dealing with today. And Chairman, thank you for recognizing me. I'm glad to be here this afternoon. We're going to consider 13 bills as soon as we get to quorum, and many of them are bipartisan. The PACT Act is historically accomplished, but we have important work to do. We have legislation today to improve a whole range of VA services and benefits.
Are you fucking... Oh. I did it again. I unplugged my damn microphone. Ay, 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 boys and girls. I know. Isn't this exciting? Like, aren't you learning a lot? So why... Now that's still plugged in, but... Yeah, see, you guys don't even have sound. Uh-oh. So what did I do? What did I do? I just fucked it all up. Whatever. I don't even care. Fucking A. I do care. Now, because you guys can hear me, but I just killed the sound to both computers. Not really to both, because this still works. Obviously, I could see it on the sound meter, but now this, which was this cable, is unplugged somewhere. Let's see. Man, my
CBO warned
There
us
it is.
that every future extender's bill will be much more
Future
expensive.
extender's bill.
The
All
budget
right.
gimmicks in the Toxic Exposure Fund are
Now we have
already
a
creating
challenge.
a serious obstacle to advancing many of the bills this committee is responsible for, including some of those we will consider today. It is our
gonna figure this
responsibility
shit
to
out.
the taxpayers
You
to
watch.
pay for our offsets
It's gonna be amazing.
and new programs we are creating. That gets a whole lot harder when many of our programs cost
I just gotta use
multiply
my brain
because
for a
of
minute.
some budgetary voodoo that was cooked up
Just use that
behind
little
closed
thing called a
doors
brain
over
for a
in the
minute.
Senate. Mr. Chairman, I'll be putting forward an amendment to solve this problem. I would revert.
That's going into there.
It would
Oh, you know what?
revert
I need
the
a
Toxic
splicer.
Exposure Fund back to its original
I do
version
it
that
that way?
you wrote, and that the House passed. My amendment would not
let's get
would
hardcore.
not
You guys
cut.
can listen.
Let me say this again. Would not cut the toxic exposure funding in any way. In fact, CBO has confirmed it would not affect the $500 million that has already been appropriated into the fund, and it would not limit the amount of funding that can be appropriated into the fund in the future. My amendment would simply reinstate normal cost estimates and scoring rules. I look forward to explaining my amendment further when the impacted bills come up. And with Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Bost. Is that 15?
We now have. Miller meets us.
Okay.
No, he's sitting right. Yeah, he's just leaning back in his chair.
Mr. LZ, please sit up in your chair.
Set up in class.
Okay.
Gonna work.
That was a good one,
Resolution
Mr.
or
LZ. All right.
refresh rate not supported.
What? Thank you. So thank you, Ranking Member Bost. We'll now move to consideration of the bills on our agenda. I'll now call up H.R. 6273. The clerk will designate the bill.
HR 6273 to direct the
Text
Secretary
will
of
circulate in
Veterans.
advance pursuant to committee rules without
You didn't
objection.
even get
First
to
reading
read
is
it, you
dispensed with.
lazy ass.
The bill will be
Let her
considered
read
as
the whole
read
damn
and open
thing.
to amendment at any point. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. There is compelling evidence that a specific integrated
You guys having
approach
fun?
to suicide prevention and healthcare systems known as zero suicide can lead to significant drops in the rate of suicide among patients. This committee held a hearing last Congress with experts from the Zero Suicide Institute, and I applaud Congresswoman Lee for drafting this bill to implement zero suicide as a pilot program for VA in 5 medical centers. VA is a leader in taking a holistic approach, a holistic public health approach to veteran suicide that incorporates many components of zero suicide program. It is still worth comparing whether a zero suicide program can add even more preventive value to VA's existing efforts. I urge my colleagues to support the bill. Is there further debate on H.R. 6273?
Wait, so where's that? What window is that?
Ranking Member Bost.
I have an amendment if that.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
I think that's
Amendment
the right
to
window.
HR
Text was
62.
circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules without objection. The reading of the amendment is dispensed with. Mr. Bost, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you,
Support your
Mr.
amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment would remove the budget gimmick that the Senate added in the Toxic Exposure Fund
Where's my mouse?
in the
Oh,
PAC Act.
shit, I figured it
Mr.
out.
Chairman, I would revert.
Watch
It would
this.
revert the fund's language back to its original version that you wrote and the House passed. It would eliminate the mandatory costs for this very important suicide prevention bill and eliminate these costs for all other bills on today's agenda that are similarly affected, as well as future bills. My amendment would simply reinstate the normal cost estimates and scoring rules that CBO used. In the case of this bill, it would have been all discretionary funding. But
Hard to
now
do.
we must identify an offset in order to move forward. This being a Suicide Prevention Month, and with suicide prevention being our highest priority in this committee, I can't think of a more important reason to remove the obstacles and advance this bill. So let me say this again. My amendment would not eliminate or cut the toxic exposure funds in any way. CBO has confirmed
It won't
that
let me get this
and will
off to
not
the other
touch
screen.
the
Why?
$500 million that has already been appropriated into the fund, and it would not limit what can be appropriated in the fund in the future. My amendment would simply resolve the mandatory scoring problem that will paralyze this committee if not addressed. I urge all members to support my amendment. Otherwise, we will constantly be struggling to advance other important and
Wasn't
even
that sick?
life-saving legislation
How I
in
fixed
this
it for you?
Congress and future Congresses. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Godlike.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. I appreciate the Ranking Member Boss' intent in offering this amendment. It raises an important issue, which is the long-term implications of the Cost of War Toxic Exposure Fund, or TEF, as it has become known as, created by the Honoring Our Pact Act. Now, this fund is absolutely crucial. And when I say this fund, I'm talking about the TEF fund, that's redundant, the Toxic Exposure Fund, is absolutely crucial to ensuring VA has the resources necessary to fully support our veterans and to deliver the new benefits available to them without having to sacrifice existing programs. And so any potential change to this fund and how it operates must be considered very carefully and requires the input of other committees that have a stake in this issue, to include appropriations and budget. What I mean is Appropriations Committee and the Budget Committee. Accordingly, I must oppose the ranking member's amendment and urge my colleagues to do the same. The Toxic Exposure Fund has created some complications for the committee in terms of how legislation is being scored.
Is it working? Type
Historically,
one in the
certain
chat
benefits
if it's working,
programs have
finally.
always been considered mandatory spending, and we address that as it comes up, such as in Representative.
Oh, I did it again. I keep typing on the wrong keyboard. See, like I muted it and stuff. I'm really doing good at this today, huh? Ay, ay, ay.
Legislation in the wake of the PACT Act's passage, and estimating that many bills will have 30% mandatory spending costs, whether or not the subject of the legislation is toxic exposure. However, I believe that as implementation begins and more cost estimates and data are available, CBO will be able to adjust its assumptions and more finely tune its methodology. Continued conversations with VA, CBO, and the Appropriations and Budget Committees will likely lessen the impact of the fund on authorizations not related to toxic exposure. Now, I remind you that the intent of the PACT Act and the intent of Congress in the PACT Act was to stop pitting veterans against seniors, children, and other Americans. It means not pitting toxic exposed veterans against other veterans, but these amendments today would effectively do that. Congress has already spoken on this issue when it passed the PACT Act, legislation many of you voted to support, and this committee should not use this as a venue to undo what Congress just did. We passed the PACT Act because toxic exposure is a cost of war, and our country needs to pay for the health care and benefits those veterans earned. What we did with the PACT Act is say that veterans are sacred ground, and I believe we did the right thing. Our country needs to pay for the health care and benefits those veterans have earned. Nonetheless, this scoring issue is not a bar and should not be a bar to considering this legislation today. Discussion of mandatory scoring can continue before any legislation is considered for the floor, and we have more opportunity to engage legislative stakeholders.
Hey, Monarch, can you do me a favor? This is super important. Oh, shit, I paused that. I didn't mean to pause that. Come on, fucker. Where's this thing? Go over here. Hey, Monarch, can you do me a favor? You're on YouTube, and you said, I need to fix my YouTube headline. It says Tuesday the 21st. First, it's Wednesday. Second, it's the 21st, not 25th. 25th. I don't give a fuck. Okay? Deal with it, Monarch. Butterflies suck.
so that it leaves us well positioned to pass bills on the House floor once we do get this issue resolved. So while I, again, appreciate the ranking member's intent with this amendment, I must oppose and encourage members to vote against it as well. However, I want to say to you, Ranking Member Boss, that I and my
just kidding. I
staff
like butterflies.
will continue to engage with you and your staff on this scoring issue.
Sorry, Monarch. He doesn't realize I have a sense of humor. I apologize, Monarch. I was just kidding. It's an error. I wasn't saying it to be mean to you or anything. Okay, sorry. You should go back to being a caterpillar. Okay, change your name to Caterpillar. Itsy bitsy
of going
one.
down the road of mandatory spending. And we knew this. This is why there were 174 no votes on such an important piece of legislation. There is no universe in which the 174 members of the United States House of Representatives who voted against the PACT Act don't want to see care and support for the veterans who are dealing with the consequences of exposure to burn pits in service of their country. Nevertheless, a sizable chunk of this body voted no, almost entirely. There were a few other reasons why. There's a large amount of money that was unpaid for, but almost entirely because of this provision of pushing this into the mandatory spending bucket, and that it's because we're going to have the kinds of consequences we're now dealing with here today. I think the chairman, I think the ranking member is correct to be raising this issue. It'd be right to raise it on every single one of the bills that are impacted as a direct consequence of what we did in committee and then what the House did by pushing it through this way. I heard the chairman say that it's trying to end pitting veterans against other individuals or certain veterans against veterans. I mean, but this is part of the problem, right? We have to make choices. We have to make decisions. And when you pull things out of the discretionary context and you put them into the mandatory context, whether it's TANF, whether it's Medicare, whether it's Social Security, whether it's provisions of care for veterans, you now put us in the situation that has resulted in significant part of having $30.5 trillion of debt, number one. And number two, it means that you're not having to make the tough decisions that every business, family, nonprofit, and organization around this country has to make every day, having to make choices. I could raise this issue with respect to Ukraine, any other number of issues that are meritorious. But if you don't have to choose, for example, between guns and butter, if you don't have to make a choice, for example, about how to fund health care for veterans and how to prioritize the resources you have, then you end up with a situation, for example, under the PACT Act, which obviously has now been signed into law, where you have the criteria that were put in place, which still raise serious questions about to how many people are going to be able to get care, whether we'll end up boxing some people out from care because you're going to have more people getting care under that criteria than perhaps were directly connected to the burn pit exposure. And we can have that debate, and we can go around and we had that debate before, but now here we sit. And as a result of this, we now have massive complications with the way we deal with the scoring, which really is just budgets and DC speak for how we're paying for this stuff. And I think we've got to have a reckoning in this body about how we fund things and stop funding things with money that we do not have. And we can have a righteous debate about tax policy and spending policy. Happy to have it. Happy to entertain those notions on the floor, in this committee, in appropriations, wherever it is. But we've got to have a serious conversation about those things because it's all too easy to, in the name of compassion and what we want to do to help people, to write blank checks. I voted against an ALS research authorization bill. I mean, you think I don't want to come up with research to help people with ALS or a dreaded disease that people die within a year and you can't get pharmaceutical companies to do tests on it because, frankly, people are gone too quickly? Of course we need to do research for ALS. But it's $500 million authorized again that's unpaid for. And we continue to do that. We continue to kick the can down the road. And veterans who served this country, didn't serve this country, and get exposed to burn pits to end up with a bankrupt country or a VA that can't actually care for its veterans in the end because the dollar isn't worth anything and because we've spent ourselves into oblivion. So I think we ought to have this debate. I think we ought to do it on each of these measures. I assume for the sake of time that we'll just have the discussion on this one, but we'll see. I'll defer to the ranking member, but I do think this is an important issue, and I think it's something that we're going to be reckoning with for a while because we jammed that through without dealing with the realities of what you do when you make things mandatory spending. Now yield back.
Any other discussion?
I fixed it. How often do I do that? How often do I do that? See, Shyman said he wants us to focus on the good looks. That's exactly what I was talking about the whole time. I was just talking about my good luck, my good looks, my good locks. You like my locks? Locks of hair. Anyway, so what I was going to say, and then I'll switch back to this hearing, is what I did was something very fancy, right? So I took the monitor 2 output from my computer. I plugged that sucker to go into the A10 mini controller. The A10 mini controller is what is this one, right? But I can also switch it to black screens. I could do everything from there, right? And then it's a little bit harder to switch that back. But listen, this is why it's so masterful, right? Now that is still showing on this monitor. Therefore, I have multiple monitors which are working, but then this monitor will also always broadcast here. So the laggy green screen-esque issue that we were having before, you'll never see it again. You're welcome for that.
Families worried about what will happen in the event of the unthinkable. The issue was first brought to my attention by one of my constituents, an active duty service member who was reviewing his policy and saw the $400,000 amount and felt that it'd be better if it could be a little higher. And he actually sent an email to my staff and to me saying that SGLA represents a commitment from America that in the event you die protecting this nation, America has you and your families back. It provides peace of mind that allows the service members to do their duty, knowing that if the worst happens, at least their family will all be okay financially and they can mourn and not suffer another catastrophe. This is his writing. My own best friend was an Air Force F-16 pilot when he died in an air crash in 2014. His wife and 2 young daughters received the SGLI. His daughters were babies when the accident occurred, and now they're teenagers. And I've watched them over the years mourn their father, yet have a normal life of sports and dances and events thanks to that money, and it matters. It's the one benefit you never want to use, but it might be the most important. This legislation is a straightforward solution. It increases the SGLI and VGLI maximum coverage amount option from $400,000 to $500,000. That'll obviously help deal with the significant inflation we're facing at the moment. Service members and veterans can then customize the coverage amount that best fits their family's needs. I think it's common sense, bipartisan solution. It mostly, pays for itself and is not a significant financial impact. I think, with the exception of active duty service members that might have some additional cost if they're serving in combat, which of all areas in which we can spend money, that's obviously one that we all generally agree on. So, with that, I will yield back to the chairman and appreciate the time.
Well, thank you, Mr. Roy. The life insurance is designed to offer protection from loss and serves as a death benefit. For a veteran or a service member, VA group life insurance offers security and confidence that loved ones will be covered and made financially whole in the event a source of income is lost. And while no amount of money can replace the life of a beloved family member, VA service members and veterans group life insurance exists to provide an affordable option to provide a fiscal shield for survivors. The loss of life does not have to equate to the loss of financial security when there are adequate VA life insurance choices available to ensure a family is protected in the unfortunate death of a service member or veteran. I do encourage my colleagues to support this bill. Is there any further discussion on H.R. 3793?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Ranking Member.
Thank you, Chairman. I support Congressman Roy's bill, H.R. 3793, the Supporting Families of the Fallen Act. The Service Members Group Life Insurance, or SGLI, and Veterans Group Life Insurance, VGLI, programs provide coverage to certain survivors of service members and veterans, respectively. H.R. 3793 would make much-needed updates to the coverage amounts for these insurance programs. The legislation would allow VA to raise the maximum payment from $400,000 to $500,000. The coverage for SGLI and VGLI have not changed in 17 years. $400,000 may have been sufficient in the economy of 2005, but this increase is needed right now when Americans are facing the highest inflation in decades. It would, in the wake of the loss of a family member, this increase of $100,000 could help the surviving spouse to keep a roof over their family's head and food on the table. This bill would give our veterans and their families peace of mind with this added financial security, and I urge my colleagues to support this, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Bost. Is there any further discussion? Are we missing? Are we short one? Are we missing? We need people back on. Members, but we have people like away from there. Do we have a quorum? Okay, thank you. If there are no further members wishing to seek recognition, I'll now call on Ranking Member Bost for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee report H.R. 3793 favorably to the full House of Representatives. I think I'm on the right section there. I am.
Okay. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Any opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to without objection. The motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority or supplemental, additional, and dissenting views on H.R. 3793.
Without objection. And without objection, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conformance changes in the committee amendments. We will now consider H.R. 8888. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R.
Text was
8888.
circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. The bill will be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Today, we are considering Congresswoman Peltola's bill, the Food Security for All Veterans Act, which would establish an office dedicated to ending veteran hunger at VA. This newly established VA Office of Food Security will collaborate with internal and external groups to develop and implement policies and procedures to identify and treat veterans at risk or experiencing hunger. That should say at risk of or experiencing hunger. The bill requires VA to work with the Departments of Agriculture and Defense to develop materials for the Transition Assistance Program to help increase access to food resources for families in need as they navigate the military to civilian transition. Before the pandemic and still now, Black, Latino, Native American, and Native Alaskan veteran families experience disproportionately higher rates of hunger. This bill requires VA to coordinate efforts with a focus on these subpopulations. And one of the issues this bill intends to affect is the disparities in VA and USDA data. USDA reports that about 11% rate of food insecurity among veterans versus VA, which reports a roughly 2% rate among veterans using VA healthcare. Congresswoman Peltola's bill requires VA, in consultation with USDA, to issue an annual report to Congress on the prevalence of veteran hunger and progress in connecting more veterans with resources like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, otherwise known as SNAP. September is Hunger Action Month. The Biden administration and this Congress have made ending hunger a priority. Next week, the White House will host a conference that will catalyze the public and private sectors around a coordinated strategy to accelerate progress and drive transformative change in the United States to end hunger. The Food Security for All Veterans Act is a critical part of this committee's role in executing solutions to end veteran hunger. I urge my colleagues to vote yes for Congresswoman Patola's bill. Is there further debate on H.R. 8888?
Mr. Chairman.
Ranking Member Bost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately, I must reluctantly oppose this bill. While I support finding ways to reduce food insecurity for veterans, creating more bureaucracy is not the best way to do this. VA is already taking steps to improve the food insecurity program. The department also opposed the creation of the office as described in this bill, as they are already working on creating such an office at the Veterans Health Administration. They also have testified that this bill, while well-intentioned, would interfere with their efforts to curb food insecurity. I look forward to working with members of this committee to find a better way and better approaches to addressing the issue. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Bost. Are there any further members seeking recognition to speak on this bill? Hearing or seeing none, I move that H.R. 8888 be reported favorably to the House. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed will say no.
No.
Independent chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. And without objection, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes in the committee amendments. Mr. Ranking Member.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority and supplemental additional and dissenting views on H.R. 888.
Without objection. We'll now move to consider H.R. 8852. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 8852,
Text was
direct.
circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. The bill will be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Now, I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Today, we are considering Congresswoman Jacobs' bill, the End Veteran Hunger Act, which she introduced with Chairman Levin, Chairwoman Brownlee, and Congresswoman Spear. In July, I traveled to San Diego to participate in the Economic Opportunity Subcommittee's field hearing entitled Ending Veteran Hunger, Examining the Impact of COVID-19 on Food Insecurity. I left that hearing concerned about how VA is addressing veteran hunger, and I encouraged the agency to do more. Since then, our committee has worked closely with VA, USDA, the Agriculture Committee, and nonprofit partners on the issue. And I'm proud of the focused collaboration to end veteran food insecurity. Congresswoman Jacobs' bill requires VA to carry out a 5-year pilot grant program aimed at connecting veterans and transitioning service members with the nutrition and resources they need. Stable access to nutritious food is a foundational element of a person's health. Food insecurity can create and exacerbate other issues and is one of the many contributing factors that has led to increased suicide rates, diabetes, heart disease, and depression. And as I said before, and I'll say it again, addressing veteran hunger is critical to our suicide prevention efforts. Every day, too many veterans live with food insecurity. Between 2015 and 2019, approximately 1 in 10 working-age veterans experienced food insecurity. The End Veteran Hunger Act of 2022 would address the gap in veterans' access to federal food and nutrition resources by empowering the agencies and organizations best equipped to reach them. Eligible grantees include community-based organizations and VSOs, and 5 of the grants must go to tribal organizations to help alleviate hunger among our Native American veteran families. Grantees will provide direct access to food resources for veterans in urgent need of nutrition assistance. Grantees will be required to support long-term solutions to sustain food security by increasing access to and enrollment in SNAP and other federal nutrition programs and providing nutrition counseling and education. This bill, coupled with Congresswoman Paltola's bill, doubles down on our core belief that no veteran should experience food insecurity. But if they do, that we will help make sure that organizations are equipped to help. Given the shared commitment of the Biden-Harris administration, Congress, the VA, and nonprofit advocates have in ending hunger, the time is ripe to make sure food insecurity is a lasting priority by making an office dedicated to the issue permanent so that it can exist in perpetuity in future administrations. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on H.R. 8852 and help put an end to veteran hunger. Is there further discussion on H.R. 8852? Ranking member?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment to H.R.
Text was circulated in
8852.
advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. Mr. Boss, you're recognized for 5 minutes. in
Thank you,
support of the
Mr.
amendment.
Chairman. As I explained earlier, my amendment would remove the budget gimmick that Senate added to the Toxic Exposure Fund and the PACT Act. Mr. Chairman, I would revert the fund's language back to the original version that you wrote and the House passed. It would not cut toxic exposed funds in any way, but it would remove the budgetary handcuffs that will prevent the committee from advancing all sorts of legislation now and in the future. I have a firm belief that we must solve the problem sooner rather than later. However, in the interest of time, I'm willing to withdraw my amendment at this time.
I thank the ranking member for his consideration. I accept your offer.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately, I will still have to oppose the bill because I do not believe that the bill is needed. There's no doubt that there is a need to address food insecurity, but I do not believe that the postponed grant fund is advisable in its current form. The VA agreed and testified at legislative hearings earlier this year that they believe that this grant program was too restrictive and not needed. VA is currently providing new screening tools to track veterans for food insecurity issues. They testified earlier this year that since 2017, they've completed 17 million of these screenings. I also think the grant program proposed in this bill would be better managed by the USDA and the Food and Nutrition Services and not the VA. I hope to work with the chairman to address this policy and cost concerns before we take up this bill on the floor, and I reluctantly recommend to our members to oppose the bill, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Bost. Ms. Brownlee seeks recognition. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be brief, but thank you for the opportunity to speak on this important bill. As already has been said, veterans and their families who are experiencing food insecurity in this country is just wholly unacceptable. Ensuring veterans have the food and nutrition they need is a basic and critical component to their overall health and wellness. We know that veterans often experience challenges navigating the confusing system of nutritional support services they may be eligible for. The End Veteran Hunger Act takes a collective approach to ending veterans' food insecurity. It authorizes VA to provide community-based organizations funding to help connect veterans with existing nutritional support programs. This is a great bill. I was happy to co-author it with Congresswoman Jacobs, and I encourage my colleagues to vote yes on this critical piece of legislation. And with that, I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Brownlee. Is there any further debate on the Jacobs bill? If there's not, I move that H.R. 8852 be reported favorably to the House. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make necessary and technical and conforming changes in the committee amendments. Ranking member?
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority and supplemental, additional, and dissenting views on H.R. 8852.
Without objection. We will now consider H.R. 8875. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 8875 to amend
Text
Title
circulated in
38.
advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. The bill will be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. We'll now consider the Expanding Home Loans for Guard and Reservists Act from Representative Ryan. Nearly 2 years ago, we expanded the home loan program to allow more Guard and Reservists to qualify. However, we missed out covering all those who have earned the benefit. This legislation makes a technical fix which updates the law to define eligibility by counting active duty for training when Guard and Reservists are training for things like special forces, aviation, or linguistics. I'm pleased to see Representative Ryan hit the ground running with this common sense technical fix legislation to make sure that Guard and Reservists don't miss out using a great benefit from the VA Home Loan Guarantee Service. I understand the minority has concerns with process, but this is a technical fix that has been scored by CEO and saves the government money. These service members deserve eligibility because they are going through the same courses and training as their active duty counterparts, taking the very same risks, and passing the same requirements. These Guard and Reservist service members are at a greater disadvantage because they are removed from the civilian workforce for extended periods of time, and after their training is complete, they need to transition back to civilian life, move back home from the base they were training at, and find employment and find a place to live. The VA home loan benefit is the kind of benefit these individuals need to transition back to civilian life effectively, and I thank Representative Ryan for bringing this fix to the committee. Is there further debate on H.R. 8875? Ranking Member, do you wish to comment on H.R. 8875?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Unfortunately, I have to oppose this bill. I certainly believe the expanding home loan benefits to members of the National Guard, but last Congress, it was my bill, matter of fact, H.R. 7445, that first proposed expanding the benefits of the members of the National Guard who have served on full-time active duty. I was proud that this expansion was later enacted in the Eikenson-Rowe omnibus package. Mr. Ryan's bill would expand the benefits of members of National Guard that are on federal active duty orders for training. I tend to agree with those who believe that active duty for training is very different from federal active duty to support ongoing operations. I could also be persuaded that this is reasonable expansion. However, members of the committee have not been given the opportunity to hear testimony and views on this bill for stakeholders or from the administration. This is because, unlike every other bill we have on the agenda today, this bill has not been subject to a legislative hearing. A hearing will allow us to understand the true impact this legislation can have on the ever-changing mortgage market and on recruitment and retention of both the National Guard and active forces. It is my hope that next Congress we can have a hearing on the benefits that are and are not provided to the members of the National Guard. We should be reviewing these benefits in a comprehensive way that assures that DOD is doing their part to put members on the right type of orders. Unfortunately, DOD has had a bad track record in this regard. But like I said, we have not had the opportunity to ask these types of questions in the hearing. That is unfortunate and does not best serve the veterans. So I urge our members to oppose, or all members to oppose the bill. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Boss. Any further discussion on H.R. 8875? All right, members who are joining us virtually, please show your faces so we can count you toward the quorum. Are we missing a quorum? Count 12. Ms. Frankel, we need Ms. Luria and Ms. Capter to show. Hi, Ms. Luria. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Luria. Okay, there we are. Do we have it?
We got one more. If
Okay, so a quorum has been reestablished. Okay, any further debate on HR 8875? All right. If not, I move that HR 8875, I move that HR 8875 be reported favorably to the House. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Any opposed will say no. No. In opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes in the committee amendments. Ranking member.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority and supplemental additional and/or dissenting views on H.R. 8875.
Without objection, I now call up H.R. 2800. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 2800 to
Without
amend
objection,
title.
first reading is dispensed with. The bill will be considered as read and open to amendment at any point.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make an inquiry.
Sir, can you state your inquiry?
I mean, I know we're struggling to get a quorum established here, but according to my count, we have majority. So not to be technical, but how is it that you can make a decision that the so-called majority actually had the majority in that vote in support when in reality, you don't have the majority in this room or participating in this hearing.
The member can call for a roll call vote if you would like. The member does not wish to call for, so we will now proceed. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. The bill will be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Oh, let me call it. I now call up H.R. 2800. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 2800 to amend Title 38 United States Code to permit veterans to
Objection,
grant.
first reading is dispensed with. The bill will be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. I now recognize Ranking Member Boss in support of the bill for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support Congressman Perry's bill, H.R. 2800, the Wingman Act. One of the most important services we provide to our constituents is the act of as liaison between our veterans and the VA. Unfortunately, the VA lacks of timely communication, often prevents Congress caseworkers from providing a quick response to veterans' inquiries. Our workers must and often wait weeks or months to get responses from VA because they do not have the access to the VA system. By the time we get the information, the VA claim may have already been decided. The veteran may have to appeal and wait even longer to receive their earned benefits. The Wingman Act would solve this problem. This bill would allow designated permanent full-time congressional staffers to look up the status of claims in the VA database, similar to the way veteran service officers currently do. Staffers would only be able to do this with the veteran's permission, and they would only be able to read the information and never edit the information. This bill would help members cut through the red tape to help constituents who have applied for VA benefits. I understand that some of my colleagues are concerned that this bill may expose veterans to private information. My caseworkers are some of the most upstanding, honorable individuals that I've worked with. One of them happens to be a veteran himself who is dedicated to helping his fellow veterans. Quite frankly, it's insulting to imply that our caseworkers who already handle sensitive information are not trusted to access VA system. The bill includes guardrails to protect veterans' private information. Further, we should monitor our staff's access and make sure VA does the same. This bill would allow us to serve our veterans' constituents more extensively, which is what many of us on the committee came here to do. I'm disappointed that the majority did not offer any changes addressing the concerns, but I hope that they reconsider their opposition and advance the bill, and I urge my colleagues to support the legislation. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Boss. Does any other member wish to address H.R. 2800? I will offer my my remarks. I recognize myself. So thank you, Ranking Member Boss. While I support providing congressional offices more tools and transparency in supporting their constituents with processing benefits and claims, VSOs and the VA have both highlighted several questions and concerns regarding the legislation. I'm concerned about the complexity of such a project and about cybersecurity. So those questions and concerns have been made known to the minority. Before undertaking something like this, VA and both the House and Senate need to come together to determine the best way to accomplish these goals and ensure that veterans' information is not compromised. Now, I think this is a good opportunity to engage with the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress to improve members' ability to provide services for their constituents. In their final report from last Congress, ModCom, as it's known, specifically recommended that House Information Resources prioritize the development of secure templates and document storage, as well as the ability to upload casework and other requests digitally. While I would oppose this legislation in its current form, I do look forward to continuing a discussion between our staff and between you and me on this topic. Is there any further debate on H.R. 2800? Mr. Roy.
I think the chairman, I'd like to associate myself to remarks of the ranking member and just note that it sure, I think dealing with my constituent services team, who I think do an exceptional job, as I'm sure many of my colleagues agree and share, this is a hurdle that they do deal with on a regular basis. I'm not insensitive to the points the chairman is making about ensuring we do it the right way, but I think that our colleague, Mr. Perry from Pennsylvania, has raised an important issue. I would support it on the merits as it is to move forward and vote for it, because I think our staff, when we hire staff into our offices, members of Congress, look, I mean, they're dealing with confidential and private information often and regularly with dealing with our constituents, and we just we have to hire good staff and work with them to make sure that they can do it the right way. But I think the purpose of the bill is a good one, which I think the chairman probably agrees with, at least the intent of, or in general terms, the intent of what's trying to be accomplished. But I would support it as it is. I trust my caseworkers to do this work and to handle the sensitive information. They're hired to represent and help those constituents. That's on us to make sure we hire the right people to do that. I think we all do that and do it well. In the same way the VA has to hire people that you're going to trust to be able to manage and look at this information, so do we. And I think it would massively facilitate our ability to serve veterans, so I support the legislation in its current form.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. Any other member wish to comment on H.R. 2800? All right.
That's me. I've got too many windows open. I'm closing some. It's what happens when I'm doing web design. I like to see every single change.
15, we're good? Quorum is present.
Bear with me. It's taking forever.
We're almost there. Huh?
Holy shit, it's already 11?
Which is it? 16 or 15? We've got council saying 15 up here.
I believe 15 is quorum. Do we have 15?
We do have 15.
We have 15. Are we agreed? All right, so a quorum is present. If there's no further debate on H.R. 28, I will call on Ranking Member Bost. 2800, H.R. 2800. I call on Ranking Member Bost for a motion.
Chairman, I ask that the committee report H.R. 2800 favorably to the House of Representatives. I did not have my microphone on. I can redo that again if it be.
Why don't you go ahead, sir?
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I move the committee report H.R. 2800 favorably to the full House of Representatives.
All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed will say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes. Ranking member, you want to?
It's not on the script, but I know where I got to go back to. Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of the intent to file mandatory, minority, and supplemental additional and/or dissenting views on H.R. 2800.
Without objection. Okay. Without objection, we'll take Mr. Banks's bill out of order. Okay. We'll now consider H.R. 5918. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 5918 to amend Title
Text was
38.
circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. And I recognize Mr. Banks for 5 minutes to discuss his bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My legislation is simple, and it would help service members who are disadvantaged by an unintended loophole. The bill would equalize the treatment of service members and veterans who paid into the Montgomery GI Bill, but later used the post 9/11 GI Bill. Some of these service members are unable to receive a refund for the $1,200 they initially paid into the Montgomery GI Bill because the VA pays out such refunds as part of their housing allowance. If they don't receive a housing allowance from the VA, they also haven't been receiving the $1,200 they are entitled to. This is a complicated situation that no one ever intended to happen. My bill would make sure that it doesn't happen anymore. It would direct the VA to make the repayment before the service member exhausts their education assistance. I do support Ranking Member Bost's amendment in the nature of a substitute to offset the cost of my legislation, and I thank him as well for offering it. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. I recognize Ranking Member Bost to offer his amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Mr. Chairman, I have an A&S at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Amendment in the nature of a
Text was
substitute.
circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the substitute will be considered as original text for the purposes of amendment. Mr. Bost, you are recognized for 5 minutes in support
Thank you,
of
Mr.
your
Chairman. I'd like to thank Congressman Banks for introducing this important bill that would close a loophole affecting many service members. Last Congress, I was proud to support General Berkman's effort to responsibly sunset the Montgomery GI Bill. The benefit has helped millions of veterans over the years, but it is time to set the stage for the continued success of the post 9/11 GI Bill. In this same vein, I am pleased to support Mr. Banks's bill to ensure that those service members who paid into the program are treated equally and receive their $1,200 back when they complete their studies. My INS would keep the base text of the bill, but would amend the effective date to include a short-term extension of the VA home loan funding fees. This extension fully offsets the cost of this bill, and I thank the American Legion for bringing this problem to our attention, and I urge all members to support my amendment in the nature of a substitute, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Bost. Under current law, veterans can lose up to $1,200 should they sign up for the Montgomery GI Bill and not fully use the benefit. The process to reclaim that $1,200 can be difficult, or at times, the veteran can simply lose out on the money because they waited too long. This legislation ensures that the veteran is repaid. The bill is supported by the Veteran Service Organization community, including by Student Veterans of America. I support the underlying bill and the Bost Amendment in the nature of a substitute. Does any other member wish to be recognized to discuss the ANS to H.R. 5918? Seeing none, the question is now on the Bost amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 5918. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed will say no. In opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the Bost amendment in the nature of a substitute is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. What did I skip?
Now we need to move the.
Oh, no, We omitted the part.
You recognize for amendment.
We have to vote on the.
Yeah. Rick, I'll make the motion.
Yeah, so I withdraw my comments about the here. Okay, I'm going to recognize Recommender Boss for a motion.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the committee report H.R. 5918 as amended favorable to the House, full House of Representatives.
All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes to the committee amendments, in the committee amendments.
Mr. Chairman.
Ranking Member Boss.
Pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice to intent to file minority and supplemental additional and dissenting views on H.R. 5918 as amended.
Without objection. Okay. Yeah, go on. We'll now move on to consider H.R. 1957.
Historic round of pledges at the conference,
Clerk will designate the
resulting in
bill
one of the
offered by
largest
Ms.
global health fundraisers
H.R.
ever held in all
1957 to
history.
amend Title.
We're also taking down the food crisis head on, with as many as 193 million people around the world experience acute food insecurity, a jump of 40 million in a year. Today, I'm announcing another $2.9 billion in U.S. support for life-saving humanitarian and food security assistance for this year alone. Russia, in the meantime, is pumping out lies, trying to pin the blame for the crisis, the food crisis, on the sanctions imposed by many in the world for the aggression against Ukraine. So let me be perfectly clear about something. Our sanctions explicitly allow Russia the ability to export food and fertilizer. No limitation. It's Russia's war that is worsening food insecurity, and only Russia can end it. I'm grateful for the work here at the UN, including your leadership, Mr. Secretary General, establishing a mechanism to export grain from Black Sea ports in Ukraine that Russia had blocked for months, and we need to make sure it's extended. We believe strongly in the need to feed the world. That's why the United States is the world's largest supporter of the World Food Program, with more than 40% of its budget. We're the leading support of the UNICEF efforts to feed children around the world. To take on a larger challenge of food insecurity, the United States introduced a call to action, a roadmap eliminating global food insecurity, that more than 100 nation member states have already supported. In June, the G7 announced more than $4.5 billion to strengthen food security around the world through USAID's Feed the Future initiative. The United States is scaling up innovative ways to get drought and heat-resistant seeds into the hands of farmers who need them, while distributing fertilizer and improving fertilizer efficiency so that farmers can grow more while using less. And we're calling on all countries to refrain from banning food exports or hoarding grain while so many people are suffering. Because in every country in the world, no matter what else divides us, if parents cannot feed their children, nothing else matters. If parents cannot feed their children. As we look to the future, we're working with our partners to update and create rules of the road for new challenges we face in the 21st century. We launched the Trade and Technology Council with the European Union to ensure that key technologies are developed and governed in the way that benefits everyone. With our partner countries and through the UN, we're supporting and strengthening the norms of responsible state behavior in cyberspace, and working to hold accountable those who use cyber attacks to threaten international peace and security. With partners in the Americas, Africa, Europe, and the Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific. We're working to build a new economic ecosystem where every nation gets a fair shot, and economic growth is resilient, sustainable, and shared. That's why the United States has championed a global minimum tax, and we will work to see it implemented so major corporations pay their fair share everywhere. It's also been the idea behind the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which the United States launched this year with 13 other Indo-Pacific economies. We're working with our partners in ASEAN and the Pacific Islands to support a vision for a critical Indo-Pacific region that is free and open, connected and prosperous, secure and resilient. Together with partners around the world, we're working to secure resilient supply chains that protect everyone from coercion or domination, and ensure that no country can use energy as a weapon. And as Russia's war riles the global economy, we're also calling on major global creditors, including the non-Paris Club countries, to transparently negotiate debt forgiveness for lower-income countries, to forestall broader economic and political crisis around the world. Instead of infrastructure projects that generate huge and large debt without delivering on the promised advantages, let's meet the enormous infrastructure needs around the world with transparent investments, high-standard projects that protect the rights of workers and the environment, keyed to the needs of the communities they serve, not to the contributor. That's why the United States, together with fellow G7 partners, launched a Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. We intend to collectively mobilize $600 billion in investment through this partnership by 2027. Dozens of projects are already underway. Industrial-scale vaccine manufacturing in Senegal, transformative solar projects in Angola, first-of-its-kind small modular nuclear power plant in Romania. These are investments that are going to deliver returns not just for those countries, but for everyone. The United States will work with every nation, including our competitors, to solve global problems like climate change. Climate diplomacy is not a favor to the United States or any other nation, and walking away hurts the entire world. Let me be direct about the competition between the United States and China. As we manage shifting geopolitical trends, the United States will conduct itself as a reasonable leader. We do not seek conflict. We do not seek a Cold War. We do not ask any nation to choose between the United States or any other partner. But the United States will be unabashed in promoting our vision of a free, open, secure, and prosperous world and what we have to offer communities of nations. Investments that are designed not to foster dependency, but to alleviate burdens and help nations become self-sufficient. Partnerships not to create political obligation, but because we know our own success. Each of our successes increased when other nations succeed as well. When individuals have the chance to live in dignity and develop their talents, everyone benefits. Critical to that is living up to the highest goals of this institution, increasing peace and security for everyone, everywhere. The United States will not waver in our unrelenting determination to counter and thwart the continuing terrorist threats to our world. And we will lead with our diplomacy to strive for peaceful resolution of conflicts. We seek to uphold peace and stability across the Taiwan Straits. We remain committed to our One China policy, which has helped prevent conflict for 4 decades. And we continue to oppose unilateral changes in the status quo by either side. We support an African Union-led peace process to end the fighting in Ethiopia, restore security for all its people. In Venezuela, where years of political oppression have driven more than 6 million people from that country, we urge the Venezuelan-led dialogue and return to free and fair elections. We continue to stand with our neighbor in Haiti as it faces political, fueled gang violence and an enormous human crisis. And we call on the world to do the same. We have more to do. We'll continue to back the UN mediated truce in Yemen, which has delivered precious months of peace to people that have suffered years of war. And we will continue to advocate for lasting negotiating peace between the Jewish and democratic state of Israel and the Palestinian people. The United States is committed to Israel's security, full stop. And a negotiated two-state solution remains, in our view, the best way to ensure Israel's security and prosperity for the future and give the Palestinians the state to which they are entitled. Both sides to fully respect the equal rights of their citizens. Both people enjoying equal measure of freedom and dignity. Let me also urge every nation to recommit to strengthening the nuclear non-proliferation regime through diplomacy. No matter what else is happening in the world, the United States is ready to pursue critical arms control measures. A nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. The five permanent members of the Security Council just...
I didn't blink. That's why I pointed at my head. Whoa, that was trippy. Whoa, look at the fancy shit I can do. Woo. Can I do that right here? Whoa, look at that. Fuck you, man. Oh, I entertain myself.
Responsible nuclear threats to use nuclear weapons. China is conducting an unprecedented concerning nuclear buildup without any transparency. Despite our efforts to begin serious and sustained diplomacy, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea continues to blatantly violate UN sanctions. And while the United States is prepared for a mutual return to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action if Iran steps up to its obligations, the United States is clear. We will not allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon. I continue to believe that diplomacy is the best way to achieve this outcome. The non-proliferation regime is one of the greatest successes of this institution. We cannot let the world now slide backwards, nor can we turn a blind eye to the erosion of human rights. Perhaps singular among this body's achievements stands the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the standard by which our forebears challenged us to measure ourselves. They made clear in 1948, human rights are the basis for all that we seek to achieve. And yet today in 2022, fundamental freedoms are at risk in every part of our world. From the violations in Xinjiang, detailed recent reports by the Office of UN and U.S. reports detailing by the U.S. High Commissioner, to the horrible abuses against pro-democracy activists and ethnic minorities by the military regime in Burma, to the increased repression of women and girls by the Taliban in Afghanistan. And today, we stand with the brave citizens and the brave women of Iran who right now are demonstrating to secure their basic rights. But here's what I know. The future will be won by those countries that unleash the full potential of their populations, where women and girls can exercise equal rights, including basic reproductive rights, and contribute fully to building a stronger economies and more resilient societies, where religious and ethnic minorities can live their lives without harassment and contribute to the fabric of their communities, where the LGBTQ plus community, individuals, live and love freely without being targeted with violence, where citizens can question and criticize their leaders without fear of reprisal. The United States will always promote human rights and the values enshrined in the UN Charter in our own country and around the world. Let me end with this. This institution, guided by the UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is at its core an act of dauntless hope. Let me say that again. It's an act of dauntless hope. Think about the vision of those first delegates who undertook a seemingly impossible task while the world was still smoldering. Think about how divided the people of the world must have felt with the fresh grief of millions dead, the genocidal horrors of the Holocaust exposed. They had every right to believe only the worst of humanity. Instead, they reached for what was best in all of us, and they strove to build something better. Enduring peace, comity among nations, equal rights for every member of the human family, cooperation for the advancement of all humankind. My fellow leaders, the challenges we face today are great indeed, but our capacity is greater. Our commitment must be greater still. So let's stand together to again declare the unmistakable resolve that nations of the world are united still, that we stand for the values of the UN Charter, that we still believe by working together we can bend the arc of history toward a freer and more just world for all our children, although none of us have fully achieved it. We're not passive witnesses to history. We are the authors of history. We can do this. We have to do it for ourselves and for our future, for humankind. Thank you for your tolerance, for listening to me. I appreciate it very much. God bless you all.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the United States of America for the statement just made, and I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. May I request representatives to remain seated while we...
Well, you know what they say. That was fucking stupid. That's what they say. Scientifically proven to be true. That's what they're all talking about. Just how dumb that whole thing was. But yeah, Biden addressed the U.S. Assembly where he proceeded to
be parents.
Talk out his ass.
As if
we're going to go back to the full committee meeting on the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. I'm going to change the overlay real quick because I'm gangsta like that. I could do things on the fly. Super on the fly, right? You guys impressed with my super on the fly live thing? Oh shit! I guess I gotta. It's taking a lot longer. This isn't really on the fly here. Oh, you know why? It's because I had a oh shit! Just deleted everything. All right. And then I got to go back over here. I take it back. It's not on the fly. It's taking forever. Was that creepy? Probably not as creepy as Joe Biden's speech. Right? Unbelievable. Did I do it? Did it fix it? Let me see. Where's the rest of it? Full committee on business meeting and markup, whatever. On veterans. See, it cut it out. Why did it do that? Hold on. Let's delete that one. Delete this one. Let's just delete that one. I deleted the wrong one. Aw. Shiitake. Now I'm going to have to do all these again. Unbelievable. This is so far from the fly. Ever. It's taken forever. I know you guys are like, Steve, hurry up. We have no idea what you're even talking about because we can't see what you're doing on your computer. Bam. Ha ha. Is that? It still cut it off. What the shit? Like what the hell, bruh? Activate it later. Share, download, save download settings, PDF, transparent background, download. I guarantee it's not going to work again. Ugh. Did it work that time? Ah, it did. F the naysayers who say I can't do something. You know. Anyway, so let's go back over to this hearing. Use a separate mouse. Turn on the sound.
All those opposed will say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the
Noes.
Boss Amendment is not agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Ranking member? Okay. The question now, we now proceed to the question of the Brownlee ANS.
I will request a roll call.
Ranking member Boss, I'm going to, it was too late, but I'm going to, out of courtesy, grant you the amendment. Is there a sufficient second? Yes, second. A recorded vote is requested. Is there a sufficient? A recorded vote is ordered pursuant to Rule 4, Committee Rule 4. Further proceedings on the measure are postponed. We now will go to the. No, I have to go on to the. Oh, we have to wait till. We'll now go. We'll now move to consideration back into order. HR 8510. We will now consider HR 8510. The clerk will designate the bill.
HR 8510.
Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with, and I recognize Mr. Pappas to offer an amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute to HR 8510 at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to HR 8510 offered by Mr. Pappas. Strike all after the enacting clause and insert the
Text was
following.
circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the substitute will be considered as original text for the purposes of amendment. Mr. Pappas, you are recognized for 5 minutes in support of your amendment.
Thank you very much, Chairman Takano. Thank you for accommodating us and getting this on today's markup. Whistleblowers play an essential role in safeguarding the federal government against waste, fraud, abuse.
Breaking news. This is incredibly important breaking news. Breaking news. My media credentials for the Wilmington, North Carolina Trump rally. Are you guys ready? Are you ready? Have been denied. I even said, hey, I'm the guy that gave you free coffee, fuckers. They still deny it. They don't want real news there. They don't want real news. Anyway. Where's this mouse?
Only the law. It's also the right thing to do. In 2019, the subcommittee that I lead heard testimony from 3 employees who suffered retaliation after blowing the whistle, including the loss of their positions at VA. In fact, one of the whistleblowers, VA clinical psychologist Minu Agevli from Baltimore, Maryland, received a termination notice just days after our subcommittee's hearing was announced. Based on the investigative record, there was little question as to whether these individuals were legitimate whistleblowers. The question was whether VA would take action. Ms. Agevli's case was only resolved this year. The same was true for Dr. Catherine Mitchell, a VA physician who was instrumental in exposing the wait time scandal. Frustratingly, Dr. Mitchell initially was able to return to work and then faced further retaliation. Third individual we spoke with, Mr. Jeff Detbarm, an X-ray technician from Iowa City. Mr. Detbarn was able to return to his duties in February of this year, but the case took more than 4 years to conclude. So let's underscore this point. For these 3 individuals, the wait for justice was measured in years. I do believe that things have recently improved. VA must do more to earn the trust of whistleblowers and restore faith among department employees who may wish to come forward and report wrongdoing. We need to see permanent changes to policies and procedures, including through improved laws. 5 years ago, Congress established within VA the Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection with the goal of bringing more accountability for department whistleblowers. Oddly, however, OAWP's work investigating whistleblower retaliation is duplicative. There's an independent federal agency that also conducts investigations into whistleblower retaliation called the Office of Special Counsel. In fact, in contrast to OAWP, the Office of Special Counsel has the ability to leverage the enforcement of disciplinary measures. Another shortcoming is VA's ability and willingness to make whistleblowers whole after they suffer retaliation. When VA concludes that a retaliation claim is substantiated, typically the employee and the department's lawyers negotiate a signed agreement to reinstate the employee's position and reimburse the employee for lost wages, legal fees, and other needs. However, these settlement agreements typically take months.
Hold on, we got some real breaking news. Real breaking news. Breaking news. Breaking news, as Stephen Lochner says. This is coming out of New York right now. Just got it on my phone. It's coming out, been reported by ABC News. New York's Attorney General Letitia James has filed a $250 million lawsuit against Trump for defrauding lenders and others. According to ABC News, for 20 years, Donald Trump and his family enriched themselves through, quote, numerous acts of fraud and misrepresentations, New York Attorney General Letitia James alleges in a new lawsuit that accuses the Trumps of grossly inflating the former president's net worth by billions of dollars and cheating lenders and others with false and misleading financial statements. The civil lawsuit filed Wednesday in state Supreme Court in Manhattan seeks a $250 million judgment and a prohibition on any of the Trumps leading a company in the state of New York. Among other allegations, the suit claims that the former president's Florida estate and golf resort, Mar-a-Lago, was valued as high as $739 million, but should have been valued at around 1/10 that amount at $75 million. The suit says the higher valuation was based on the false premise that it was an unrestricted property and could be developed for residential use, even though Mr. Trump himself signed deeds donating his residential development rights and sharply restricted changes to the property. James is referring to findings to federal prosecutors in Manhattan who could possibly open a criminal investigation into bank fraud, according to a footnote in the lawsuit. Through, quote, persistent and repeated business fraud, end quote, the Trumps convinced banks to lend the money to the Trump organization on more favorable terms than deserved, according to the lawsuit, which named the former president, 3 of his children, the company, and 2 of its executives, Alan Weisselberg and Jeff McConey. Trump made it known through Mr. Weisselberg that he wanted his net worth on the statements to increase, a desire Mr. Weisselberg and others carried out year after year in their fraudulent preparation of the statements, the lawsuit said. The scheme to inflate Mr. Trump's net worth also remained consistent year after year. Weisselberg last month pleaded guilty to unrelated criminal charges of tax evasion brought by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, which has been conducting a parallel investigation. Trump has long denied wrongdoing and has called the investigation a politically motivated witch hunt by Attorney General he has called racist. James, who is black, doesn't mean she's not racist. I don't know why they pointed that out. Rejected a settlement offer from the Trump organization last month to resolve the matter, according to anonymous sources. During a deposition last month, Trump repeatedly invoked his Fifth Amendment right, as he's allowed to. They use that as an incriminating. The lawsuit includes numerous instances in which Trump invoked Fifth when asked about how the company calculated the value of certain properties. In a civil trial, jurors would be able to draw a negative inference about Trump declining to answer, which is why they're put out there. The Attorney General's investigation began in March of 2019 after Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, testified before Congress that Trump's annual financial statements inflated the values of his assets to obtain favorable terms for loans and insurance coverage, while also deflating the value of other assets to reduce real estate taxes. The suit also said in a 2012 statement valued rent-stabilized apartments at the Trump Park Avenue property as if they could be rented at market value. As a result, units collectively worth $750,000 were valued at nearly $50 million, according to the lawsuit. Trump Turnberry, a golf club in Scotland, was valued at nearly $127 million, but the suit says that since it opened in 2017, the golf course has operated at a loss each year. It doesn't mean it's not valued at higher. Look at startups. They operate at a loss every year, and they're valued in the billions. Anyway, as a result of using values for the golf course ranging between $123 million and $126.8 million based on the employing the fixed asset scheme is materially false and misleading. The golf course should have been valued at much lower figure, according to the lawsuit. The suit said, quote, the magnitude of financial benefit derived by Mr. Trump and the Trump Organization by means of these fraudulent and misleading submissions was considerable. They're never going to stop going after that guy, ever. They're just going to keep doing it. Why that guy wants to be president, I have no idea why he wants to do it anymore, why he cares so much for this country when the country has repeatedly and consistently stabbed him in the back. I don't know, man. I don't know. It's very, very crazy. And look at all the taxpayer funds that this is going to cause. The big lawsuits and everything diving into Trump and depositions and court filings and everything like that. And keep in mind, these things drag on forever. Letitia James, the New York State Attorney General, also has an investigation into the company that we reported on last year, Nexus Services, where they are also being sued by the state. Nothing happens with that case either. It just takes forever. But yeah, it's crazy. It's a civil suit. It does not stop him from running. It's just more negative publicity. That's why they're doing it. That's why all the media is going to talk about it. I'm sure they already are on social media and mainstream media. They're all going to talk about it and say, oh, they got him. And we're going to hear all these weird things. Because think about everything that they've tried to take down this guy. This is just the latest episode of bullshittery. That's a new word I just coined today. Bullshittery. You're welcome for that. Let's go back to this hearing, and then I'm going to leave and go to lunch. So I'll be back in about an hour. April is in charge. You piss her off, you're gone. That's how it works.
Consider H.R. 4601. So I call up H.R. 4601. The clerk will please designate the bill. Is our clerk? Where's our clerk?
H.R. 4601 to amend Title 38 United States Code to authorize the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to award grants to states to improve outreach to veterans and for other purposes.
The text was circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with, and I now recognize Representative Levin to offer an amendment. Representative Levin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the ANS. Hold on.
We have to call it the 11 ANS first.
Before we get to you. We got a little ahead of yourself there.
Okay.
So, Representative Levin, I think you had a technical issue. We got to let Representative Levin log back on. Mr. Levin?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to
Text is
H.R.
circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the substitute will be considered as its original text. For the purposes of amendment, Mr. Levin, you're recognized for 5 minutes in support of your amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your including my bipartisan legislation, the Commitment to Veteran Support and Outreach Act, or CVSO Act, in today's markup. This is a bipartisan, bicameral bill that I introduced with Representatives Rosendale, Tim Ryan, and McMorris Rogers, alongside Senators Baldwin, Sullivan, Hester, and Daines, to improve veterans' ability to use their benefits. Specifically, the CVSO Act would authorize VA to award competitive grants to bolster the work of county veteran service officers, also known as CVSOs. CVSOs are local county employees who are nationally accredited by VA to prepare, present, and prosecute VA claims. They're often veterans and their families' best allies in navigating the red tape at VA and the first to inform them about resources at their disposal. CVSOs help enroll veterans into the Veterans Health Administration and provide assistance on a range of benefits, including service-connected disability compensation, VA home loans, education benefits, and job placement assistance. The grant funding provided under the CVSO Act will be used to hire additional CVSOs, train more CVSOs for VA accreditation, improve outreach to veterans, and otherwise enhance CVSO's ability to support veterans. This is particularly important for the millions of veterans who gain benefits under the recently enacted PACT Act and need help accessing them. While this is not a mental health program, it'll strengthen economic supports, improve access to care, and enhance connectedness, key strategies that reduce risk and promote protective factors for suicide. For those reasons, I urge my colleagues to support the CVSO Act today. That's also why the National Association of State Directors of Veterans Affairs, or NASVDA, the National Association of Counties, or NACO, and the National Association of CVSOs, or NACVSO, among others, support this legislation. I have a statement for the record from those organizations to that effect and ask that they be entered into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Levin. This bill authorizes VA to provide grants to states to implement programs that provide outreach and assistance to veterans and their families to ensure that such individuals are fully informed about veterans' benefits and programs. Specifically, VA may provide grants to states to implement or enhance outreach activities or activities to assist in development and submittal of claims for veterans or increase the number of county or tribal veteran service officers in the state. Additionally, VA would be required to prioritize awarding grants in areas with a critical shortage of county or tribal veteran service officers, areas with high rates of suicide among veterans, and areas with high rates of referrals to the Veterans Crisis Line. With high-profile, sweeping veterans legislation like the PACT Act recently signed into law, the support and outreach offered by H.R. 4601 would greatly assist in implementing such new programs as smoothly as possible. With enhanced communication and outreach focused on explaining new benefits and services to a broader range of veterans and their families, the more opportunities we will have to connect with potential beneficiaries interacting with VA for the very first time. With more accredited claims representatives available to assist with the preparation and submission of claim applications, the better positioned VA will be to decide these claims in a more timely and accurate manner. And with funds to recruit and train more county and tribal veteran service officers, helpful skills and information related to life-changing benefits, and other VA services will reach farther into our veteran communities that are so often and undeservedly overlooked. I recently visited the Navajo Nation. When I recently visited the Navajo Nation, I heard that this legislation would be extremely helpful to their efforts to assist veterans with accessing their benefits. So I am pleased tribes will be able to directly apply for these grants. I thank Representative Levin for crafting this important legislation and urge my colleagues to support the amendment in nature of substitute and the underlying bill. Does any other member wish to be recognized to discuss the amendment in nature of substitute to H.R. 4601? Ranking Member Boss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of substitute.
Text was circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. Mr. Boss, you are recognized for 5 minutes in support of your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Levin's legislation seems to be the most seriously impacted by the Toxic Exposure Fund scoring problem. CBO explained that they had to assign an additional $70 million mandatory cost because of the fund's impact. That creates a serious barrier to passing this legislation. My amendment would permanently resolve that issue and the other bills on today's markup and all the future bills. It is vital to the committee's ability to operate that we resolve this situation, and I urge my colleagues to support the amendment. In the interest of time, I will not repeat myself again. And I yield back.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Bost. I just want to I appreciate that you won't repeat the arguments. I'll just say I'll just say to you that VA is putting in place plans and procedures to implement PACT, and changes to the fund would delay VA's ability to execute on those plans and could negatively affect successful implementation of the PACT Act itself. Now, I know the ranking member did not take an unfounded position that the fund was some kind of slush fund, and I think that the fact we are having this debate indicates that we're being thoughtful about how it is being used. But given that the fund is subject to appropriations, we need to ensure appropriators weigh in on this proposal. I know we've been talking about this. There is precedent for a separate fund like the Toxic Exposure Fund, such as the funding used for overseas contingency operations in the Department of Defense. To preserve access to resources for certain programs, such as the cost of taking care of toxic exposed veterans, we must set aside funding, and Congress should avoid hamstringing itself. And I know that we're going to be working together on this issue. Does any other member wish to be recognized to discuss the Bost Amendment to the ANS to H.R. 4601? Any other member? Seeing none, the question is now on the Bost Amendment to the 11 amendment in the nature of substitute to H.R. 4601. All those in favor will say aye. All those opposed will say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the Bost Amendment to the amendment in the nature of substitute is not agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Mr. Chairman.
Ranking Member Bost.
I am unable to support Congressman Levin's ANS. This legislation would authorize the Secretary. We already had a roll call, right? We just had the roll call. Hold on just a minute. I would ask for a recommendation or a roll call on the last one. On the Bost Amendment.
On your Bost Amendment.
Yes, please.
Okay. All right, so there being a sufficient second, I assume. Yes, I see a sufficient second. A recorded vote is ordered on the Bost Amendment nature of substitute pursuant to Committee Rule 4. Proceedings on the measure shall be postponed. We will now move to H.R. 3304. I now call up, the clerk will designate the bill H.R. 3304.
H.R. 3304 to
Text was
amend
circulated in
title.
advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. The bill will be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. I recognize myself to offer an amendment in the nature of substitute. The clerk will designate the Takano amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R.
Text was circulated in
33.
advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with, is considered as read, and will be considered as original text for the purposes of amendment. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes to speak on my amendment in the nature of a substitute. Now, I was honored to introduce this legislation with Representative Fletcher, and I offer this ANS to allow this committee to advance the bill and bring it to the floor of the House as soon as possible. Currently, disabled veterans are only allowed a single grant to modify a vehicle to provide them mobility. That means there are cars that are 25, 30, or even 40 years old on the road because the veteran has no other option. The Cars for Vets Act finally expands eligibility for disabled veterans to obtain vehicles modified for their disabilities more than once in their lifetime. The amendment in the nature of substitute immediately allows those who've waited 25 years to get a new vehicle today, and soon the benefit will allow all of those who have waited 10 years to do so to obtain a vehicle. The legislation also expands the definition of medical services to include certain vehicle modifications so that veterans can attend medical appointments. This legislation has long been a priority for veterans and is supported by DAV, VFW, PVA, and countless other veterans organizations. Does any other member wish to be recognized to discuss
Mr. Chairman.
The ANS to H.R. 3304? Ranking Member Bost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very supportive of your amendment in the nature of a substitute. The ANS would finally find a fiscally responsible way to provide deserving population and with safe and reliable transportation that they need. We all know that the life of a vehicle is not infinite, except for my father who just recently passed. He thought they were infinite. And then because of this, I'm real pleased to see the proposed move forward today and that this is fully offset. And I can say that the case of many of these other bills on the agenda, and I can't say that with many of the other bills on the agenda. The underlying bill is very similar to H.R. 1361, the Auto for Veterans Act, which was introduced this Congress and last Congress by our colleague, Congressman Muser. I want to thank Paralyzed Veterans of America for their continued advocacy for this additional grant for service-connected disability veterans. And I encourage all of my members to support this because it is so vitally needed. And with that, I yield back.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Bost. Any further discussion on the bill? And I'm curious how old your father's vehicle was.
Old.
Okay, all right.
Many of them.
All right, so the question is now on the Takano Amendment and nature of substitute. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the Takano Amendment and nature of substitute is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Is there any further debate on H.R. 3304? If not, I recognize Ranking Member Bost for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee report H.R. 3304 as amended favorably to the full House of Representatives.
All those in favor will say aye. Any opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes in the committee amendments. Ranking Member Bost.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority and supplemental additional and dissenting views on H.R. 3304 as amended.
Without objection, we will now consider H.R. 2521. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 2521.
Text was circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. The bill will be considered as read, and I'm open to amendment at any point. I recognize myself to offer an amendment in the nature of substitute. The clerk will designate the amendment in the nature of substitute.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to
Text was
H.R.
circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with, is considered as read, and will be considered as original text for the purposes of amendment. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes to speak on my amendments in the nature of substitute, my amendment in the nature of substitute. And I'll say that I'm pleased to offer an ANS to Congresswoman Lawrence's bill, H.R. 2521, the Doula for VA Act of 2021. Now, this bill requires VA conduct a feasibility and advisability study on the proposed pilot project to provide pregnant veterans with doula support services and measure the outcomes of the veterans' birth experiences, mental health, and physical well-being. The United States has a maternity mortality crisis, and our veterans are not protected from it. In fact, they are disproportionately more likely to experience severe maternal mental health outcomes than their civilian counterparts. We know that doula care can be an effective tool in mitigating pre- and postpartum mental health crises and has been proven to be a factor in reducing childbirth complications. VA must investigate its ability to provide such holistic and effective care. I urge my colleagues to support the amendment in nature of substitute. Does any other member wish to be recognized to discuss the ANS to H.R. 2521?
Mr. Chairman.
Ranking Member Bost.
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to
Text was
H.R.
circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules, and without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. Thank you, Ranking Member Bost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, Mr. Chairman, my amendment would revert the Toxic Exposed Fund, or in the PACT Act language, back to its original version that you wrote in the House passage. It would eliminate the mandatory costs of this bill, even though your amendment is in the nature of substitute, only requires a study. CBO has identified a mandatory cost that will have an impact should the pilot go forward on VA's recommendation. My amendment would simply reinstate CBO's normal cost estimate and scoring rules. It is clear that the amendment lacks majority support today, and in the interest of time, I withdraw it.
Well, I thank you, and I accept your You're withdrawing the amendment, Ranking Member Bost.
Yeah, Thank you, Mr. Chairman, but unfortunately, I still can't support the bill. I cannot agree more that this is it's critical that we support women veterans throughout their pregnancies. Just in the last few years, the use of maternity services within the VA has increased 44%. This legislation would require VA to conduct a study on whether it would be feasible and advisable for the department to establish a pilot program to pair pregnant veterans with doulas. Doulas are not healthcare professionals, but do offer emotional and educational support for new mothers. However, this is currently not certifying criteria, credentialing or licensing standards. There are none for doulas in the country. This lack of standardization training for doulas gives me concern about the pilot program that would be required in the introduced version of the bill. VA shares those concerns. I thank Chairman Takano for recognizing that the work to amend the bill to ensure that we were taking a more careful and measured approach to this issue. Unfortunately, I cannot support the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2521. Even though this legislation now requires a study, CBO has estimated a mandatory cost. Without the fund fixed in place, I cannot proceed with this. Proceed to support this legislation, and with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
All right. Is there further debate on on the Takano ANS? If not, the question is on the Takano ANS. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. No. And the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. And I now recognize myself. I recognize myself for a motion. I move that that H.R. 2521 as amended. 2521. I move that H.R. 2521 as amended be reported to the House, be reported favorably to the House. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no.
No.
The motion is agreed to. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. And read that part of the thing. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes in the committee amendments. Ranking Member Bost.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file mandatory or minority or supplemental additional and dissenting views on H.R. 2521 as amended.
Without objection, we now will move to H.R. 7589. The committee will now proceed to the consideration of H.R. 7589. Clerk will please designate the bill.
H.R. 7589 to amend Title 38 United States Code to prohibit the imposition or collection of co-payments for certain mental health outpatient.
Text is circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with, and the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I now recognize myself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will designate the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Amendment in the nature of a
Text was
substitute.
circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with and is considered as read. The first reading dispensed with is considered as read and will be considered as original text for the purposes of amendment. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. I am very pleased to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute to my bill, H.R. 7589, the Reduced and Eliminate Mental Health Outpatient Veteran Copays or Remove Copays Act. This bill turns a legislative proposal from VA into a law that will make every enrolled veteran's first 3 outpatient mental health appointments at VA free every year. We know that what may seem like low copays can in fact be significant financial barriers for many veterans. Our goal is to knock down all barriers for veterans seeking and accessing high-quality, timely mental health care at VA. VA strongly supports this bill, as do many VSOs and mental health organizations. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on the ANS, which does not change the intent of the original bill, but incorporates technical assistance from VA. Is there further discussion on the amendment and the nature of a substitute?
Mr. Chairman,
Ranking Member Bost.
I would like to thank Chairman Takano for introducing H.R. 7589 that removes Copays Act. Mental health care is an important part of health care, especially at VA. This bill would eliminate copays for veterans for their first 3 outpatient mental health visits per year. In doing so, it will encourage veterans to seek the needed mental health care and support to do the brave thing and reach out and ask for that help. I'm glad to support the bill today.
I thank the ranking member for his support. Is there any further debate on the Takano amendment? If not, the question is on the Takano amendment and the nature of a substitute to H.R. 7589. All those in favor will say aye. 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 All those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment and the nature of a substitute is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. I recognize Ranking Member Bost for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee report H.R. 7589 as amended favorably to the full House of Representatives.
All those in favor will say aye. Opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes in the committee amendments.
Mr. Chairman.
Ranking Member Bost.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority, supplemental, additional, and dissenting views on H.R. 7589 as amended.
Without objection. That concludes, let's see. We will now move on to the unfinished business of recorded votes, which were postponed. Recorded votes were ordered on the following measures: H.R. 6273, H.R. 1957, H.R. 4601. We're going to just take a slight pause to make sure that we have all of the votes in order. All right. Pause is lifted. Recorded votes were ordered on Bost Amendment to H.R. 6273. The question now occurs on agreeing to the Bost Amendment to H.R. 6273, on which a recorded vote was ordered. The clerk shall call the roll.
Ms. Brownlee,
No.
Mr. Lamb,
No.
Mr. Levin,
No.
Mr. Pappas, Ms. Luria, Ms. Luria,
Luria votes no.
We'll say no together.
Ms. Luria,
Luria votes no.
Mr. Mervan,
Mervan votes no.
Ms. Sheriff-Lewis McCormick,
Sheriff-Lewis McCormick votes no.
Where's the volume?
Mr. Sablon, Mr.
Sablon votes no.
Ms. Underwood,
Underwood votes no.
Mr. Allred, Mr. Allred, Ms. Frankel,
No.
Ms. Sotkin,
No.
Mr. Trone, Mr. Trone, Ms. Capter,
No.
Dr. Ruiz,
No.
Mr. Gallego, Mr. Gallego, Ranking Member Bost,
Yes.
Ms. Radawagon, Ms. Radawagon, Mr. Bergman, Mr. Banks, Mr. Roy,
Yes.
Mr. Mann,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Ms. Mace, Mr. Cawthorn,
Yes.
Mr. Nels,
Yes.
Mr. Rosendale,
Yes.
Dr. Miller Meeks, Dr.
Miller
Miller,
Meeks says yes.
Mr. Elsie,
Elsie, yes.
Ms. Conway, Ms. Conway, Mr. Allred, Mr. Allred, Mr. Trone, Mr. Trone, Mr. Gallego, Mr. Gallego, Ms. Radawagon, Ms. Radawagon, Ms. Conway, Ms. Conway, Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Takano votes no. Are there any members who wish to change their vote? The clerk shall report the vote.
Mr. Chairman, for this vote, there are 12 ayes and 14 noes.
The amendment is not agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Mr. Chairman.
Ranking Member Bost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My motion to reconsider was left on the table. You finished that?
Yes.
Yes, so now, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I now move that H.R. 6273 be favorably reported to the House. All those in favor shall say aye.
Mr. Chairman, I do need to speak.
Ranking Member Bost.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regardless of the fact that the amendment was not adopted, I strongly believe that the bill is important, and so H.R. 6273 would build on the VA's existing suicide prevention and initiatives by establishing a zero suicide pilot at 5 VA medical centers, including one that serves veterans in rural and remote areas. And it dismays me that still not so many veterans in their own lives every day. 2020, approximately 16 veterans died by suicide every day, for a total of more than 6,000 veteran suicide deaths. This is a fight that has only been marginally won over the last several years, but every effort counts. We must continue fighting in every way possible. The Zero Suicide Pilot Program would require VA to consult with external experts and adopt a continuous quality improvement method to address suicide. It would improve training in suicide prevention strategies for VA's workforce from top to bottom, in recognition of the fact that stopping suicides requires everyone's support and dedication. The pilot would teach staff to become comfortable discussing mental health and suicide issues. Veterans are all flagged at risk of suicide and would receive a standardized assessment to determine their next course of treatment. I appreciate that Congresswoman Lee for her introducing of H.R. 6273, which could provide VA with another tool in fulfilling its suicide prevention mission. Mr. Chairman, I ask that you work with me to identify an offset that could pay for the important legislation before it goes to the floor, or commit to me that you would not advance on the bill on the floor until the cost issue is resolved. This is one exception I am willing to make in an effort to save every veteran's life possible in our fight against suicide. With your commitment, I would support the bill and would yield back if that's the case.
Well, Ranking Member Boss, I can't say that I'll commit myself to the offset, but I will commit myself to working with you on the CBO scoring issues and finding a solution not only for this bill, but for bills that both the minority and the majority hold as priorities.
Okay.
So I recognize you for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee report H.R. 6273.
The question is now on H.R. 6273. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed will say no. Ayes have it. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Mr. Chairman,
Ranking Member Boss.
pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority and supplemental, additional, and/or dissenting views on H.R. 6273.
And without objection, staff are organized to or authorized to make necessary technical conforming changes. Recorded votes were ordered on the substitute amendment to the Brownlee Amendment and nature of substitute to H.R. 1957. The question now occurs on agreeing to the Boss substitute to the Brownlee Amendment and nature of substitute to H.R. 1957, on which a recorded vote was ordered. The clerk shall call the roll.
Ms. Brownlee.
This is on the Brownlee Amendment, Mr. Chairman.
This is the Boss amendment to the Brownlee ANS.
No.
Mr. Lamb.
No.
Mr. Levin.
No.
Mr. Pappas. Ms. Luria.
No.
Mr. Mervan.
No.
Ms. Sheriff-Phyllis McCormick.
No.
Mr. Sablon.
No.
Ms. Underwood.
Underwood votes no.
Mr. Allred.
No.
Ms. Frankel. Ms. Frankel. Ms. Slotkin.
No.
Mr. Trone. Mr. Trone. Ms. Capter.
No.
Dr. Ruiz.
No.
Mr. Gallego. Ranking Member Bost.
Yes.
Ms. Radewagen. Ms. Radewagen. General Bergman. Yes. Mr. Banks. Yes. Mr. Roy. Yes. Mr. Mann.
Yes.
Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Ms. Mace. Mr. Cawthorn.
Cawthorn, aye.
Mr. Nels.
Yes.
Mr. Rosendale.
Rosendale, aye.
Dr. Miller Meeks.
Miller Meeks, aye.
Mr. Elsie.
Elsie, yes.
Ms. Conway. Ms. Conway. Ms. Frankel. Ms. Frankel? Mr. Trone? Mr. Trone? Ms. Radewagen? Ms. Radewagen? Ms. Conway?
Madam Clerk, how is Ms. Frankel recorded?
She's not
No,
recorded.
Frankel votes no.
Ms. Conway? Ms. Conway? Mr. Chairman?
Chairman Takano votes no. Clerk will report the vote.
Mr. Chairman, for this vote, there are 12 ayes and 16 noes.
The amendment is not agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The question now occurs on agreeing to the Brownlee amendment in nature of a substitute to H.R. 1957. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote has been requested. Is there a sufficient second? Yes, there is. The question now occurs on agreeing to the Brownlee amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1957. The clerk shall call the roll.
Ms. Brownlee?
Aye.
Ms. Brownlee votes aye. Mr. Lamb? Mr. Lamb?
Aye.
Mr. Lamb votes aye. Mr. Levin?
Aye.
Mr. Levin votes aye. Mr. Pappas? Mr. Pappas votes aye. Ms. Luria?
Aye.
Ms. Luria votes aye. Mr. Mervan? Mr. Mervan? Ms. Sheriff Lewis McCormick?
Aye.
Ms. Sheriff Lewis McCormick votes aye. Mr. Sablon?
Aye.
Mr. Sablon votes aye. Ms. Underwood?
Underwood votes aye.
Ms. Underwood votes aye. Mr. Allred?
Aye.
Mr. Allred votes aye. Ms. Frankel?
Aye.
Ms. Frankel votes aye. Ms. Slotkin?
Aye.
Ms. Slotkin votes aye. Mr. Trone? Mr. Trone? Ms. Capter?
Aye.
Ms. Capter votes aye. Dr. Ruiz?
Aye.
Dr. Ruiz votes aye. Mr. Gallego? Mr. Gallego votes aye. Ranking Member Bost?
No.
Ranking Member Bost votes no. Ms. Radewagen? Ms. Radewagen? General Bergman? No. General Bergman votes no. Mr. Banks? Mr. Banks votes no. Mr. Roy?
No.
Mr. Roy votes no. Mr. Mann?
No.
Mr. Mann votes no. Mr. Moore?
No.
Mr. Moore votes no. Ms. Mace? Ms. Mace votes no. Mr. Cawthorn? Mr. Cawthorn votes no. Mr. Nels? Mr. Nels? Mr. Rosendale?
Rosendale, no.
Mr. Rosendale votes no. Dr. Miller Meeks? Dr. Miller Meeks? Mr. Elsie?
Elsie, no.
Mr. Elsie votes no. Ms. Conway? Ms. Conway? Mr. Mervan?
Mr. Mervan votes yes.
Mr. Mervan votes yes. Mr. Trone? Mr. Trone? Ms. Radewagen? Ms. Radewagen? Mr. Nels? Mr. Nels? Dr. Miller Meeks? Dr. Miller Meeks? Ms. Conway? Ms. Conway? Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman Takano votes yes. Are there any members who wish to change their votes? The clerk will report the vote.
Mr. Chairman, for this vote, there are 16 ayes and 10 noes.
Mr. Chairman, it's Lauren Underwood. May I be recognized?
Ms. Underwood?
Can you instruct the staff to update the slide with what item we're voting on next?
Yes.
Thank you.
The Brownlee amendment in nature of substitute is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Staff are authorized to make necessary, I now move that HR 1975 as amended, let me say that. I now move that HR 1957 as amended be reported favorably to the House. All those in favor shall say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Staff are authorized to make necessary and conforming changes, technical changes. The minority, all right. I'm going to extend, I realize this is an important issue for you to be recorded, and so I will extend the courtesy. The clerk will, the question now occurs on the motion to favorably report HR 1957 as amended to the floor of the House. The clerk shall call the roll.
Ms. Brownlee?
Aye.
Ms. Brownlee votes aye. Mr. Lamb?
Yes.
Mr. Lamb votes aye. Mr. Levin?
Aye.
Mr. Levin votes aye. Mr. Pappas? Mr. Pappas votes aye. Ms. Luria?
Aye.
Ms. Luria votes aye. Mr. Mervan?
Mervan votes yes.
Mervan votes yes. Ms. Sheriff-Lewis McCormick?
Sheriff-Lewis McCormick votes aye.
Ms. Sheriff-Lewis McCormick votes aye. Mr. Sablon?
Sablon votes aye.
Mr. Sablon votes aye. Ms. Underwood?
Underwood votes aye.
Ms. Underwood votes aye. Mr. Allred?
Aye.
Mr. Allred votes aye. Ms. Frankel? Ms. Frankel? Ms. Slotkin?
Aye.
Ms. Slotkin votes aye. Mr. Trone? Mr. Trone? Ms. Captor?
Aye.
Ms. Captor votes aye. Dr. Ruiz?
Aye.
Dr. Ruiz votes aye. Mr. Gallego? Mr. Gallego votes aye. Ranking Member Bost?
No.
Ranking Member Bost votes no. Ms. Radewagen? Ms. Radewagen? Mr. Banks? Mr. Banks votes no. Oh, General Bergman? General Bergman votes no. Mr. Roy? Mr. Roy votes no. Mr. Mann?
No.
Mr. Mann votes no. Mr. Moore?
No.
Mr. Moore votes no. Ms. Mace? Ms. Mace votes no. Mr. Cawthorn?
Cawthorn votes no.
Mr. Cawthorn votes no. Mr. Nels? Mr. Nels? Mr. Rosendale?
Rosendale, no.
Mr. Rosendale votes no. Dr. Miller Meeks? Dr. Miller Meeks? Mr. Elzey?
Elzey, no.
Mr. Elzey votes no. Ms. Conway? Ms. Conway? Ms. Frankel? Ms. Frankel?
Ms. Frankel?
Mr. Trone? Mr. Trone? Ms. Radewagen?
You missed it?
Madam Clerk, how is Ms. Frankel recorded?
Ms. Frankel is not recorded.
Ms. Frankel, how do you wish to vote?
Frankel votes yes.
Ms. Frankel votes aye. Ms. Radewagen? Ms. Radewagen? Mr. Nels? Mr. Nels? Dr. Miller Meeks? Dr. Miller Meeks? Ms. Conway? Ms. Conway? Mr. Chairman?
Chairman votes aye. Are there any members who wish to change their votes? The clerk will report the vote.
Mr. Chairman, for this vote, there are 16 ayes and 10 noes.
The motion is therefore agreed to, and the bill as amended is ordered reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes in the committee amendments. Ranking Bost.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority or supplemental additional and/or dissenting views on H.R. 1957. Is that it, as amended? As amended.
Without objection. Recorded votes were ordered on the Bost amendment to the Levin amendment and nature substitute to H.R. 4601. The question now occurs on agreeing to the Bost amendment to the Levin amendment and nature substitute to H.R. 4601, on which a recorded vote was ordered. The clerk shall call the roll.
Ms. Brownlee?
No.
Mr. Lamb?
No.
Mr. Lamb votes no. Mr. Levin?
No.
Mr. Levin votes no. Mr. Pappas? Mr. Pappas votes no. Ms. Luria?
No.
Ms. Luria votes no. Mr. Mervan?
Mervan votes no.
Mr. Mervan votes no. Ms. Sheriff Lewis McCormick?
Sheriff Lewis McCormick votes no.
Sheriff Lewis McCormick votes no. Mr. Sablon?
Sablon votes no.
Mr. Sablon votes no. Ms. Underwood?
Underwood votes no.
Ms. Underwood votes no. Mr. Allred?
No.
Mr. Allred votes no. Ms. Frankel?
No.
Ms. Frankel votes no. Ms. Slotkin?
No.
Ms. Slotkin votes no. Mr. Trone? Mr. Trone? Ms. Captor? Ms. Captor?
No.
Ms. Captor votes no. Dr. Ruiz?
No.
Dr. Ruiz votes no. Mr. Gallego? Mr. Gallego votes no. Ranking Member Bost?
Yes.
Ranking Member Bost votes yes. Ms. Radewagen? Ms. Radewagen? General Bergman? General Bergman votes yes. Mr. Banks? Mr. Banks? Mr. Roy? Mr. Roy votes yes. Mr. Mann?
Yes.
Mr. Mann votes yes. Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Moore votes yes. Ms. Mace? Ms. Mace votes yes. Mr. Cawthorn? Mr. Cawthorn votes yes. Mr. Nels? Mr. Nels? Mr. Rosendale?
Rosendale, aye.
Mr. Rosendale votes aye. Dr. Miller Meeks? Dr. Miller Meeks? Mr. Elsie?
Elsie, aye.
Mr. Elsie votes aye. Ms. Conway? Ms. Conway? Mr. Trone? Mr. Trone? Ms. Radewagen? Ms. Radewagen? Mr. Banks? Mr. Banks? Mr. Nels? Mr. Nels? Dr. Miller Meeks? Dr. Miller Meeks? Ms. Conway? Ms. Conway? Mr. Chairman?
Chairman votes no. Are there any members who wish to change their votes? The clerk will report the vote.
Mr. Chairman, for this vote, there are 9 ayes and 16 noes.
The amendment is therefore not agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. I understand that Ranking Member Bost would like to be recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm unable to support Congressman Levin's ANS. This legislation would authorize Secretary to award grants to state Indian tribes to improve outreach and assistance to veterans on VA benefits. Under the bill, the VA would prioritize grants based on the areas that have a large population of underserved veterans and high rates of suicide. I support the intent of the bill, and I support bolstering the efforts of county and tribal VSOs who help veterans with their claims. Oftentimes, the VSOs may be the only accredited representation that the rural and remote veterans have access to. In light of the massive expansion of health care and disability benefits under the PACT Act, it is critical that the county and tribal VSOs have the tools they need to assist our veterans. However, I cannot support the ANS because the majority solution to the problem created by the Toxic Exposed Fund is unacceptable. Rather than solve the underlying problem, the ANS exempts the grant program from the Toxic Exposure Fund in order to make the mandatory score go away. If we exempt every program and pieces of legislation that is impacted by the Toxic Exposed Fund in this way, we will create an unmanageable mess. 2 weeks ago, the VA provided its initial plan for how the additional fund-backed act would be used to expand health care and benefits. VA noted that it is already very difficult to track when programs will be paid for by the Toxic Exposed Fund as opposed to the regular budget. For example, VA quoted, "It is not economically or operationally justifiable to parse disability compensation claim conditions to different examiners based on how they are funded," end quote. It would be irresponsible for the committee to create another layer of complication by creating piecemeal exemptions to the fund. Instead, we need to fix the problem once and for all by passing a solution like the amendment that I offered. As I said earlier, while I support the intent of the bill, I cannot support the proposals we have before us today. I urge my colleagues to oppose the ANS, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Boss. The question is now, the question now occurs on agreeing to the Levin Amendment in the nature of a substitute as amended to the amendment in nature of a substitute to H.R. 4601. Again, the question now occurs on agreeing to the Levin Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4601. All those in favor will say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed will say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of an agreement, nature of a substitute by Representative Levin is agreed to. I now move that H.R. 4601 as amended be reported favorably to the House. All those in favor will say aye.
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 All those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The motion, without objection, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes in the committee amendments. Ranking Member Boss.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority and supplemental, additional, and dissenting views on H.R. 4601 as amended.
Without objection. Well, this concludes the business of the markup. Does the ranking member or any other member wish to be recognized before we adjourn?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm grateful for the efforts of the members here today. I know it's been tough trying to hold in here for both sides of the aisle as work is going on all over the Capitol. But I look forward to considering some of these bills on the House floor. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask for your help in trying to find a way forward on all the numerous bills that are pending in the U.S. Senate. It is the majority's job in both chambers to work with all parties to put together a strategy to pass the legislation we have pending into law. We still do not seem to have a plan for passing a year-end package of bills. Our committee and the Senate VA committee have been discussing this package for almost a year, and the time is running out. Passing bills out of this committee and the House does not get them to the President's desk. I look forward to working with the Chairman and others to address these situations before the end of Congress. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Well, I thank the ranking member for his comments. I will say, while we technically have a majority in the Senate, the ranking member knows very much as well as I do the rather special rules that the Senate has, and I agree with you. We have many bills on both sides of the aisle by our members, by majority and minority members, which deserve to get to the desk of the President. We've already passed them, and the Senate merely needs to act on them. We need to work with our colleagues on both sides of the aisle in the Senate so that we get past the very special rules that they have in the Senate. So with that, I want to thank all members for their attendance and participation, and this meeting is now adjourned.